Hello, everyone. It is your boy, Murder Mystery with Joey, and we are back at you with another collection of short stories. Alright, let's hop right into it. I spend a chronic amount of time in the woods desert, so I have a few. These all took place in northeastern Wisconsin. When I was 12, I found a small red shoe that looked to have been for a toddler pressed halfway into the mud by an old beech tree. This gave me an immediate uneasy feeling. Another strange find was a very large black garbage bag tucked underneath a huge white pine tree. A morbid curiosity came over me to investigate it, and sure enough, it was full of gallon Ziploc bags, each completely filled with blood. My mind got hit with that immediate cold feeling of dread. During a hike down a trail that meandered through wetlands, I came across an abandoned house off trail on higher ground in the absolute middle of the woods. I found several abandoned buildings in the forest before, and I actually love them, explore them regularly. The difference with this one is it wasn't that old compared to every other I've come across. It wasn't dilapidated in the way all the others had been. There were no roads for about 10 miles, and I was at least a mile off trail. Despite being puzzled by all of this, I wasn't deterred from investigating it a bit. I circled the house and found the back door to be the ideal entrance. There was an intact 1970s version and lots of waterlogged furniture and books. The first bedroom was just an iron bed frame with no mattress. The second was directly next to the first. I peeked in and noticed this one had a mattress on the bed frame that looked considerably newer than the other furniture. It was still very dirty, but was clear of debris that everything else was covered in. Then my eyes were drawn to the large Ziploc bag on the mattress that had a bottle of shampoo, papers, and other small bottles. All these items looked to be brand new. Thankfully, my instincts clicked immediately in that moment, and I calmly but quickly backtracked out of that house. Someone was living there. While in that moment, I was freaked out like no other in hindsight. It just makes me kind of sad. We don't have homeless people in this particular region, normally due to temperatures dropping to as far down as 55 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter, and rural Wisconsin offering no infrastructure for the homeless. If I came across that person again, I would do what I could to help them within my ability. I'm a 28-year-old female, and I like to solo travel. This past summer, I headed to Moab to stargaze and hit a couple of the parks over there. Because I was mainly going due to its dark site status, I wanted to stay somewhere with as little light pollution from the town as possible. I found this ranch online that's property line butts up against Canyonlands National Park. So I paid the owner to sleep on his land. He did this as a business. Super remote, basically had to take an unpaved service road miles to even get there. My tent was set up at the very edge of the property line. Everything to my right was basically heading into the Needles district of the park. After laying on my cot staring at the stars for a couple hours, I decided to head to bed. Just before bed, I heard footsteps. It's a very gravelly and rocky area, just outside my tent to my left. But I figured it was just an animal. I ended up falling asleep, but at 3:45ish in the morning, I was woken up by something. I thought it was just the wind because the whole night had been pretty dead silent until then. But then I heard some more shuffling around, maybe like 4 footsteps, but now coming from my right. Just as I was about to convince myself it was nothing, I saw a flash go off outside my tent. I started realizing that since I technically was on a ranch, even though the edge of it, maybe the owner had some sort of satellite on one of the red rocks and it was flashing every couple of minutes. As I try to sleep again, my eyes are just closing. Another flash goes off outside, but this time it's way closer, way brighter, and coming from a different area. To be clear, it wasn't just a flash and that's it. It was literally like a camera flash, like I saw the kind of double shutter a camera flash makes. And I could also see the main circle of light at the center of the flash that then plumes out like a camera flash does. I hope I'm explaining that right. Anyway, for the next 2.5 hours, this flash would circle around my tent, coming from all different directions, sometimes super close to the canvas of my tent, sometimes further away and duller, but I never heard any footsteps circling me, and I absolutely would have. The final straw that made me literally fear for my life was one last flash coming from right at my tent door. It literally looked like someone had put the camera right up to the zipper and clicked a photo. Also, to be clear, my tent wasn't see-through. It was super thick canvas, so even if there was a person out there trying to take pics of me in my tent, they couldn't have seen me inside. I've been trying to come up with a non-creepy explanation for this. At first I thought maybe lunar photographers, but literally the number one rule in lunar photography is no lights, no flash. My other theory was heat lightning, but then I would have seen the light coming from overhead and not right against my tent. Not to mention the distinct center circle of light that then plumed out, like a camera flash. Super unsettling, and I'll only be solo camping in my car from now on. I'm an 18-year-old from Northern California. Late last year in 2023, I decided to go on a solo one-night camping trip on a secluded trail. My plan was to set out early and hike all day through beautiful forested mountains until I went off trail and set up camp for the night. The next day, I would finish the hike and get picked up by my family where the trail ended on a dirt road. I'd been on this trail before with my father and knew it very well. It rarely is marked on maps, which is why I like hiking it, and normally I wouldn't do this by myself, but I was feeling old enough and brave enough to attempt it. I knew that the chances of seeing another person was close to zero, as I hadn't seen a single person hiking it before, even in the daytime. And I chose this trail specifically because I wanted to camp out in this region, but camping there isn't allowed by the Park Service. So by choosing this trail in particular, there was a little chance that I got caught and busted by some hikers. For this reason, I chose not to start a fire and instead used a propane cooker. My dad dropped me off at the trailhead. I was by no means unprepared. I had 3 knives on me, a whistle for mountain lions, and plenty of experience in the area. I hiked all day and enjoyed myself until I came to my predetermined camp spot off the trail. I set up my tent, had dinner over my stove, and tucked in for bed. I woke up in the middle of the night rather suddenly, and at first I didn't hear anything and thought I woke up randomly. I waited a few moments laying up with my eyes open, then I heard a twig break not far from my tent. I didn't panic immediately as I thought it could be a deer or a raccoon. I was going to make a noise to scare it off, but before I did, I heard 2 consecutive steps pressing on the pine needles and twigs. My heart began racing as it most certainly sounded like a human walking. Keep in mind, I'm off the trail in a place where I haven't seen anybody before. I reached to my side where I had my buck knife and grabbed it in my hand. I heard the walking come towards my tent, but not directly, and then stop. I was terrified, but kept silent. Even if I wanted to yell, I felt I couldn't. And then I heard what only confirmed my fears. The thing outside my tent began to hum in a deep, guttural tone. There's no doubt it was a person. I gripped my knife knowing that was all I had to defend myself. The humming continued, but I stayed completely silent, hoping they would just leave. It kept going for what felt like minutes until the person stopped and began walking away from my tent. I then heard scratching on one of the trees near my campsite before I heard them dash away, creating a huge commotion of grass, pine needles, and branches breaking. Needless to say, I did not fall asleep after that and stayed up all night clutching my knife. By morning, the sun had come up, and I hadn't heard anything else. I got up and immediately began packing my things to make a mad dash for the end of the trail. I ran while constantly looking back. I ended up at the dirt road by noon and called my family to pick me up. They did, and I relayed the whole story. To this day, I haven't gone back on that trail, and I made the difficult decision not to inform the authorities, as I couldn't pin anyone to a crime, and it wouldn't mean admitting that I illegally camped in the area. This is my only experience, but we stayed at a campground in Glacier National Park. It was our second night at the campground, and our friends decided they'd stay that night at the site next to us. owned by natives, and they shared a bunch of cool information with us about their family history and how centuries of their family have been buried on this land. It was fascinating, and this will, of course, tie in later. One night I woke up to my boyfriend telling me, it's okay, it's just the wind. And when I came to, all I heard was insane wind and our whole tent shaking. Our tent was on top of a Jeep as well. Literally felt like we were going to fly away. Montana weather is wild. Anyway, I asked him how long he's been awake, and he tells me quite a bit because something spooked him. He told me that about an hour prior to the windstorm starting, he heard footsteps outside the tent. Little footsteps, to be exact, like a child's. Mind you, the host told us their kids were all over the ages of 17 and 18. My boyfriend said they ran back and forth a couple times, and he kind of knocked it up to be an animal or something and tried to rest until it came back and he felt something mount the ladder. Now, we have a tent that attaches to our truck for use at home as well, and you can always feel when someone's on the ladder. As soon as he felt that, he said, "Hello?" in a very stern voice, and whatever it was dismounted and ran. I tried to reason and say, maybe it was an animal. It wasn't. To bring him peace of mind, but we were both spooked at that point. We were pretty restless. The following morning, we woke up and exited our tent. When we approached our friends, we asked how they slept, and most of them said good, pretty normal. Except for one. Said his girlfriend psyched herself out and probably had a nightmare. And when I asked what happened, she said, "I swear to God, I heard footsteps going back and forth from the tent. They stopped for a bit and then came back and the zipper started to move and I shouted, 'Who's there?' And then she was definitely spooked, and my boyfriend and I looked at each other and they all said, 'What?' Then we explained what happened. Long story short, we did not stay a second night, and I honestly wish we did so I could talk with the hosts. Knowing they are native, the dead mean a lot to them. I wish was able to ask, and maybe they knew or had an experience like this before. In my heart, I know it wasn't their kids, because if they're really that old, I'm sure they aren't that interested in scaring off business for their family. But also, Little Footsteps was prominent here, and no guest would let their child run around either. It was spooky, but I love spooky things, and I just wonder what it really was. And to tying in with a lot of Native American cultures, it could have very well been the little people playing some pranks. Who knows? Maybe in another episode we dive into the little people and multiple, not just one Native American tribe, but multiple Native American tribes all have different stories and different accounts of the little people and what they are and what they represent. It's actually pretty interesting. Anyway, okay, back to the stories. I was on a solo backpack trip through Yosemite. I started talking to a guy I met about the trip. The guy said that he used to do solo trips often, but would never solo again after experiencing something horrific on his last trip. The guy said he was 2 days into a 6-day hike in the middle of desolate wilderness when he came upon a dead man in a suit with a bullet hole in his head, and the body was very fresh. He never heard any gunshots, and he could not see signs of anyone else around. He was filled with dread and felt like he was being watched. Took off running back down the trail in the direction he came from. He hiked 2 days and 2 nights without rest back to the trailhead. He said the nighttime was the absolute worst. Every noise he heard and shadows he saw felt like something was stalking him in the dark. He told the authorities upon his return and never heard back from them. He wondered if maybe the man was shot and thrown from a helicopter. My friend said he had to stay with a group for a couple of nights after hearing that story and even cut his trip a bit short, feeling spooked. Wow. This isn't the craziest thing that I've ever been through, but it's still something I can't explain. This past year, I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. There is about 600 miles of the trail I hiked and camped alone. In one of these sections, I was alone in Northern California, slightly north of Mount Shasta. And if you know Mount Shasta, you know it to be literally filled with the paranormal, possibly aliens guarding a portal to another realm, all of this lovely stuff. Cults, murders, a bunch of things. Anyway, I got to a beautiful spot and knew it was the best spot to set up camp. It was gorgeous. 360 views of woods in the valley below and mountains everywhere. I could see it raining on Mount Shasta, probably my favorite campsite in Northern California. I still remember the exact mile and have some footage of the site during daylight. I set up my tent, and after admiring the sunset, I went to bed. I could see outside below the vestibule when I was lying down in the tent. As I was trying to go to sleep, I saw a white light in the valley, maybe about a quarter to a half mile away. Not right near my tent or anything, I wasn't close to any towns. In the Sierra Mountains, south of this area, I would see an occasional remote cabin in the woods, so I figured that's what it was. There were no access points or dirt roads, no forest clearings, just thick woods surrounded by mountains. I looked at the light for a bit and tried to think of what it could have been, but it was pretty remote, so I didn't know. I was tired from hiking all day, so I didn't think too much of it. A little later, I looked out again and noticed another light. It was an orange light slowly circling the white light. It was slowly morphing in shape as it circled. I watched it for a long time, trying to understand what I was looking at. It had a very calm motion, and it was almost mesmerizing. It wasn't like a lot of people's orb UFO experiences, where it darts around and then vanishes. It was slightly different. I eventually fell asleep. It started raining around midnight, and I looked out of my tent and still saw both lights, one white stationary light and one orange morphing light. I woke up again around 4 a.m. to go to the bathroom and walked outside my tent, and it was still there. Same motion. I tried to get a video, but due to the distance and darkness, it just looked like another crappy video that didn't show anything. I woke up around sunrise and looked for it, but both of the lights were of course gone. I didn't see these lights around sunset or sunrise, only in darkness. I know these would have been visible during sunrise and sunset too. I'm sure there's an explanation, but I genuinely have no clue what I was looking at. I'm still trying to figure it out. Unrelated, but near that area, I was walking, and to the right of the trail was some thick brush, maybe 5 to 6 feet tall. This was near the Shasta Trinity Forest area, maybe 1 to 2 days after the lights in the woods. I was hiking alone, and I noticed about 100 feet away from the brush was being flattened by something, and it was moving very quickly. It was approaching the trail and was going to end up right next to me if I continued my pace. I couldn't see what was flattening this brush, but it had to be strong. It reminded me of something you'd see in Jurassic Park. I assumed it was a bear. I still think it was. But I didn't want to surprise the bear and have a close encounter. I yelled, "Stop!" Then it stopped. Completely, I remained still and waited to see what was going on, but it was completely still. It was really quiet everywhere. Total silence. I got pretty unsettled and started talking to whatever it was while I walked by. I just kept saying things like, "I'm going to walk by and be on my way, my friend. Hope you're having a good day." I kept walking and kept looking back, but nothing moved from that point onward. Like I said, it was probably a bear. Black bears are generally like big raccoons and don't want to interact with humans, but I encountered a few bears and they always ran away when I told them to get lost. After speaking with other hikers, I noticed I met a few people who said how NorCal was a little unsettling. The Southern California desert is very windy and the Sierra Mountains have tons of flowing streams. NorCal doesn't have as many streams or as much wind, so it's just a silence that pervades, which can feel ominous, especially in the dark. And that's my explanation for the feeling, at least. But after going through the SoCal desert, Sierra Mountains, NorCal, Oregon, and Washington, NorCal is the only section that was a little unnerving to me, and I did portions of each of these sections alone also. I was on a property out in Mount Shasta, and we always joked there was a Bigfoot on it. But none of us were really joking. It was always some nervous jokey, "Oh, there's our Bigfoot," followed by nervous laughter and then a moment of serious silence and staring into the woods. Still makes me laugh and gives me goosebumps to this day. I think for the most part, whatever is up in the Mount Shasta woods lets you hang as long as you're respectful. Only stories I've ever heard of people being chased out and genuinely being scared was when they were fucking around somewhere they shouldn't have or being loud and obnoxious. I was just minding my own business during a walk on a trail through Yellowstone one day. Heard some strange sounding grunts and howls coming from a patch of bushes not far from the side of the trail. I went to investigate. That's when I saw the thing that scarred me and turned my life completely upside down. As I peeked around the bush's edge, there stood a Bigfoot. Now, I don't want to say exactly what it was doing, or I really can't explain exactly what it was doing. It turned to me and I was immediately hit with this, I need to turn around and walk as fast as I possibly can. It's giving me a chance to go. And I did that. I did not turn around. It did not follow. And I was able to get out of there. I came here hoping anyone could share similar experiences or give insight. I took a trip to stay in a cabin in the middle of the woods high up in the mountains of the city of Ranger, Georgia. The neighborhood was 30 minutes up in the mountains away from civilization, and even the cabins were spread far apart. The front deck of the cabin was completely exposed to the woods, so I acknowledged that any animals could stroll along if they pleased. But I stayed there for about a week, and me and my boyfriend sat outside on the front deck every night. Very late, and at no point felt in danger. It was peaceful with fireflies out, sounds of crickets every night. Till the fifth night, it was eerily dark too. The moon was covered heavily. It was about midnight, and all of a sudden I didn't feel peace like I did those other nights. The forest went completely quiet, and I felt a horrible sense of dread. I genuinely feared for my life. I sat there in my chair looking out into the dark forest, trying to rationalize and calm myself down that it was just my mind playing tricks. But all of a sudden, my boyfriend said out loud that he felt unsafe, and that's when I realized it wasn't just me. We then both heard a blood-curdling scream, and we pulled out a flashlight to see what it was. Turns out it was a gray fox. They make those scary screaming sounds. And the weird part was that the fox was running and had its ears and tail down like it was scared. This was in June, and I read that foxes scream like that when it's mating season or if they're in danger. Their mating season is winter, and this happened in June, so I do believe this fox was in danger or afraid as well, adding to our fear. The cabin has 3 floors, and we were able to climb out the window and sit on the roof because we wanted to still be outside and relax. Didn't matter how high up I was, I felt something truly evil and stayed inside. The only other time I felt something so evil or like someone was watching was when I had a few paranormal experiences at a haunted house. Georgia doesn't really get mountain lions that often. It was maybe a bear, but it didn't feel that way at all. It felt completely unnatural. You just need to remember, the Appalachian Mountains are older than bones. I know what you're thinking. How can that possibly be? Well, they're just that unbelievably old. The Appalachians are one of the oldest mountain ranges on the planet and are estimated to be about 480 million years old. The Appalachians were formed about 100 million years before the first animals stepped foot on the land. This means that the majority of fossil remains present in the rock are from when all life existed in oceans. There are some exceptions to the no bones makeup of the Appalachia, so no telling what they might be home to.